Hello, and welcome to the Arab Digest podcast. I'm William Law, editor of the Arab Digest newsletter, and my guest today is Francis Ghilès. Francis, a regular contributor to the Digest, is a specialist on security, energy, and political trends in North Africa and the Western Mediterranean. He's a senior associate research fellow at the Barcelona Centre for International Affairs and a visiting fellow at King's College London. Francis, good to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me, as usual.
Okay, it's always my pleasure to have you on the podcast. Now, at a recent conference on Algeria at the London School of Economics, you presented a paper titled A Blueprint for Bold Reforms. And one of the points you made in your presentation is that talented young Algerians are leaving the country to Europe, to Canada, well, to places all over the world. So how does Algeria affect economic reforms when many of the best and the brightest are leaving, Francis?
Well, it's a contradictory and contrasting situation, because it is true that many educated and talented Algerians are leaving, but there's also been a reverse flow in the last year or so. It's difficult to estimate them, but probably at least 20,000 Algerians returning from France because of the current climate in France to Algeria. Now, a number of these returnees are Islamic in the sense that their wives wear scarves or hijabs, whatever, but they are educated. They have been educated in France. And furthermore, the flow to Canada is slowing down simply because Canadian rules about accepting immigrants, including educated ones, are tightening. So it's a contrasted situation. It's not as bad as a few years ago, but that does not stop the Algerian economy from growing quite fast, 3.8% this year. And it is obviously being advantaged. It's being helped by the current crisis in the Gulf. And also, it must be said, by certain reforms in the energy sector, or liberalization, if you will, of the energy sector, which were enacted during COVID, but which are only coming to fruition 5 years later.
Okay, so the situation economically is not that bad. We shouldn't overplay the extent to which there is a brain drain, but it has been damaging, hasn't it? The number of Algerians who have left the country, educated Algerians?
It certainly has been, but you see, the Algeria sits on plenty of oil and gas. Now, exports of oil and gas, particularly gas, are not increasing, because although production is increasing, domestic use of gas is increasing, simply because the price of electricity in Algeria is one of the cheapest in the world. So it leads to a lot of wastage, and the authorities have not so far contemplated any idea of cutting subsidies, which are very heavy. That said, GDP per capita in Algeria has reached $6,000 compared to Morocco's 4,800. It is growing every year, and GDP overall has reached 286 billion. Now, Algeria is benefiting from the current crisis in a number of ways. One, because the price of gas has increased following the Iranian attacks on the Qatari gas facilities a few months ago. So the price of gas has gone up, and Algeria is making big efforts to produce more gas, notably by cutting back on flaring, which is a major problem in Algeria, as it is in Libya and Egypt. So you can gain marginally, but every extra billion cubic meters of gas is worth, dare I say, its weight in gold today in view of the situation. But it's not just gas. Algeria is the third largest producer, fourth largest producer, and third largest exporter of helium, which is a critical input for industries like semiconductors, healthcare, and aerospace. Algeria, being one of the biggest producers of helium, though much smaller than Qatar, is benefiting there again from the fact that Qatari exports, which account for 25% of all exports of helium in the world have effectively been stopped. So I'm not quite sure what the price of helium is, but it has skyrocketed in recent months. Algeria also has, for instance, produces sulfur, which is derived from oil and gas. There's less sulfur in Algerian oil and gas than in the Gulf. Nonetheless, it has sulfur, so it can continue its production of fertilizers based on phosphate rock, of which it has plenty, because one of the things you need is sulfur. Neighboring Morocco is suffering a major problem because it has stocks of sulfur until July, but the price of sulfur there again has skyrocketed as a result of the Gulf crisis, and Morocco is having to cut back its production of fertilizers, and indeed the overall output of the phosphate company of Morocco has dropped probably by the fertilizer output has dropped by about 33% since the beginning of the year. So in a way, it's the advantage of the current situation which is helping Algeria to do much better, this year
okay,
than last year.
But isn't the risk there, Francis, that masks some of the structural issues that the Algerian economy is facing? And also, at the conference, you did speak about the economy in Morocco, how that economy is doing good business with Europe. The Algerians, could they learn anything from what the Moroccans are doing?
Well, the Moroccans have opened their economy to foreign investment, and they've done very well as a result. But there is a fragility in Morocco in the sense that Morocco is going to the IMF at the moment. Morocco needs money. Now, Morocco gets a lot of aid from the United Arab Emirates, probably Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. Were it not for this money, it could not finance its armed forces, a number of things it couldn't do. Now, for the moment, that money is secure. But in the topsy-turvy situation we are in diplomatically, it's very difficult to gamble. And for instance, if you take the relations with Israel, well, Israel has been very important in Morocco's security in all kinds of ways for many years. But the question must be asked today, in view of Israel's policies, might this rebound one day against Morocco? And we do not know. And conversely, when the Abraham Accords were seen as a positive development, because by recognizing Israel, Morocco was able to secure American recognition of its sovereignty over Western Sahara, at least in words. Today, the situation is looking more confused. Algeria will never join the Abraham Accords for a very simple reason. It's a country which has fought a bitter colonial war against France 70 years ago, but one of the most bitter colonial wars in the second half of the 20th century. And it would be unthinkable for a country like Algeria, whoever runs it, to sign an agreement, come into a group of countries which is led or co-led by the main colonizer in the Middle East, nominally Israel. So there's no way the Algerians could join. And as for any confrontation between Israel and Algeria, I mean, some people speak about it. It's a long way away, and I think the Israelis have other fish to fry. What is of much greater concern to Algeria today is the situation in Mali and its soft underbelly, the Sahel countries of Africa.
Yeah, I want to get to the Sahel, but let me just stick with Israel and Morocco. That relationship, as you said, it's been going on for a long time. There was a win for Morocco in terms of getting Trump to say, yep, you can have the Western Sahara. The Israelis are integrating into the Moroccan economy. They're certainly doing a lot of security sharing. What do the Algerians think about that? Is that making the Algerians uneasy? Because, of course, the Algerians have, for a long time, been very, very strong in supporting the Palestinians.
Well, I think what the very strong links between Morocco and Israel do is that they make any solution of the Western Sahara absolutely impossible. If the greater the Israelis embedded in Morocco, the less likely we will ever get a solution to the question of the West Sahara. So whether that's of greater concern to Algeria or to Morocco, I do not know. For Algeria, they consider Morocco as a client state of Israel.
All right, that's their view of the Israeli-Morocco relationship. But what about Algeria's relationship with Russia? There are those who suggest that the relationship with the Russians has been very tight indeed.
Algeria has never been an ally of the USSR yesterday or Russia today. In the 1960s, France refused to sell weapons to Algeria, but it didn't hesitate to sell its most advanced planes to Libya. So the Algerians had to turn somewhere else. And the French, not only did they refuse to sell weapons, but they prevailed upon the English and the Americans not to sell weapons, the argument being the Algerians support the Palestinians, in other words, terrorists, quote unquote. So they turned to Russia. So today, 3/4 of the weapons come from Russia, including the latest Sukhoi. Algeria is the only country in the world outside Russia to deploy the latest Sukhois. But it also buys weapons elsewhere, notably in Italy. Corvettes, cruise ships, helicopters, military helicopters, Augusta. So it doesn't just buy weapons in Russia, but the reason it buys weapons in Russia goes back to the initial refusal of the French to sell to the new state in the 1960s weapons it required. So that is a situation. Algeria has always considered itself rightly as wrong or wrongly as equally friendly with Russia as it is with the United States. And one must say today that relationship with the Trump administration isn't bad at all, despite what Trump is doing in the Middle East. Algeria is concerned by its immediate neighborhood. And today, that doesn't mean Tunisia. Tunisia, it will help financially, discreetly, and has been doing for the last few years. But it is very unhappy about the situation in Mali.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, hang on. Before we get to Mali, I'm going to get there, but I want to come back to Russia. What is the relationship with Russia today? Is it still as good as it was back, a few decades ago?
No, there have been for the last few years two major points of friction. One is Libya and the support the Russians have given to General Haftar. The Algerians are dead set against Haftar. They support the national unity government in Tripoli. So they're not at all happy about Russia backing or intervening in eastern Libya. And they are not, of course, they're even less happy about the deployment of the Wagner mercenaries in Mali since the French left, I think, 3 years ago. That they are very unhappy with, to the extent that about 2 years ago, and I might have mentioned this in an earlier podcast, I think it was a little less than 2 years ago, that the Malian junta, helped by Wagner mercenaries, got within a few dozens of miles of the Algerian frontier. On that occasion, we now know that the chief of staff of the Algerian army rang up his vis-a-vis in Moscow because relations between Russia and Algeria go through the military, not basically through the foreign office. It's military to military. And General Shengriha said to his vis-a-vis in Russia, if these troops, Malian and Wagner mercenaries, advance 1 inch more, we'll flatten the whole lot out. The Wagner troops moved back by 100 or 200 kilometers. So it's an interesting story. It didn't surface very much in the international press, but Algeria is in the current turmoil where everybody is playing against everybody else. Basically, it wants to secure its borders.
You're listening to the Arab Digest podcast with me, William Law, and the energy and security analyst, Francis Ghilès. For more on what Arab Digest has to offer, head to our website, arabdigest.org, where you can find details on how to subscribe to our reader-supported daily newsletter. Sign up, and you receive the first 2 months for free. That's arabdigest.org. Francis, you were just talking about Algeria's concerns about its border security. Is there a concern about the border with Morocco?
It's not too worried about Morocco because I think, personally, my view has been for the last 40 years that Algeria and Morocco were too intelligent to go to war. They might have skirmishes or the odd thing, but going to war with one another, I've never believed it would happen. And today I'm quite as convinced as I ever was that it will not happen. It suits each regime to brandish crisis or this or that or the other from time to time. But each side of the frontier, Rabat and Algiers, know perfectly well that it would be an absolute disaster if a war started. Furthermore, one must remember that since 2013, when the Algerian gas field of Tigin-Tourin, which lies near the Libyan frontier, was attacked by Islamists coming from Libya, there's been not only a massive redeployment going back more than 10 years of Algerian troops from the Moroccan border to the Libyan and the Malian border, but also all the money on defense, building new airports, building new barracks, securing the frontier, the very, very long frontier which runs along between Algeria, Libya, Algeria, Mali. That has been the key focus of the Algerian High Command.
Okay, so that's the focus. That's the focus. And I've been reining you in on Mali, but let us now go to Mali. You've touched on the threat that the Mali insurgents and the Wagner forces posed 2 years ago. What is the situation today, and how is that threatening Algeria's security? Because as you say, it's a very long border. You've got the Libyan border, you've got the Mali border. Libya could blow up, at any moment. And of course, Mali is already on fire.
Well, in Mali, in recent months, a few things have happened. One, Turkey has been flying, if you'll believe it, Syrian jihadis to Mali to help the junta. Then we get Ukrainian mercenaries which have appeared to, I don't know, financed by whom or how it happened, but it is avowed they are fighting the Wagner. Allegedly, they're there to fight the Wagner mercenaries. And in recent months, we've had Colombian soldiers appearing, or at least mercenaries, not soldiers, Colombian mercenaries appearing in Mali. So it is a complete mess. And the situation is not much better. It's a bit better in Niger, but hardly in Central Africa. And then you have to move across to Sudan. I mean, the whole region is in such a huge mess that nobody knows what might happen tomorrow. So the Algerians are really concentrating on that, because the Israelis are involved in this part of the world, the Turks are involved in this part of the world, because the idea seems to be, at least in Israel or maybe in Turkey, I'm not sure exactly how they think on that one. The greater the chaos, you've got to be there, because then you have a seat at the table when an eventual political discussion starts.
Yes, and let us add the Emiratis to
the
mix.
Yeah, of course. Now, the Emiratis and the Algerians loathe each other. That is another point. And the Emiratis matter a lot in Morocco, because their ambassador in Washington is a very powerful man, has a lot of influence in Morocco. So the Emiratis and the Israelis for the Algerians are the real problem. It's not the Americans, it's not the Europeans in a way, it is these two. And the situation is so confused in Central Africa, because the Moroccans have been trying to compete for influence in this part of the world, the Sahel belt, with Algeria. But at the end of the day, the only conclusion about this competition is that it makes the security of both countries much weaker, because it's only if Morocco and Algeria, who both have a solidly structured army, air force, good intelligence. It's only if they collaborate that at least the western end of the Sahel countries, let's say Niger to Mauritania, could be stabilized.
And what if Morocco and Algeria did get together on security?
It's only if these two countries agreed that you could, for instance, get a gas pipeline crossing Africa. The Moroccans have pushed their project by sea to Nigeria. Whether this works, we have to see. But there is a project of a gas pipeline from Nigeria to Algeria, which would certainly help develop Mali and the countries it crossed. But projects like this cannot go ahead as long as Algeria and Morocco are at daggerheads. Mm-hmm. As I said before, the greater the Israeli involvement in Morocco, the less likely we will ever get a legal and internationally recognized solution to the Western Sahara, let alone the opening of frontiers.
Well, that's right, Francis. And as you say, the Israeli strategy is to destabilize the Emiratis, very busy in Sudan, very busy in Libya, very busy elsewhere in the Horn of Africa, and of course, very close to the Israelis. So you have these two countries having a very significant impact. But let me bring you back just finally to the economy in Algeria, because it's not as robust as perhaps it ought to be, given the advantages it has with the current situation, with the war in Ukraine, with the war in the Gulf. And I'm just wondering, Francis, if you were invited in by the Algerian government and they said to you, Francis, give us 3 ideas about how we can make our economy work better and benefit our people more, what would those 3 ideas be?
Well, I mean, if you take the liberalization of the private sector, it is not moving really very much. But there is an oddity. If you take the pharmaceutical sector in Algeria, which is very important, it has state companies doing very well, private Algerian companies doing very well, and foreign investors, French, doing very well. And pharmaceuticals depend in no mean way on oil and gas. So that sector is doing very well, and it has private elements, state elements, foreign elements. Why do they not extend what they've managed to do in the pharmaceutical sector to other sectors? That's a great question. And I think that there's just, I don't know if I can call it a lack of foresight. I mean, there's a whole generation of Algerians who, between the Civil War and the Bouteflika years, just left Algeria, died. Right, they're no longer there. You have a younger generation coming up. Now, they are rather well educated, because you must remember that, for instance, in Morocco, the literacy rate is 70%. In Algeria, it's more like 93%. The level of education in Algeria, the level of health, is good, like in Tunisia. So they have the people, but they will not countenance, for the moment, a liberalization of sectors outside the pharmaceutical, maybe food processing, because they've got big investments from Qatar and from Italy. That is proceeding well, but they will not countenance a liberalization of other sectors. In the oil and gas sector, it has to be said that they have liberalized their rules 6 years ago. More and more companies are coming in. The BP has just returned to Algeria in January after an absence of a number of years. The American companies are particularly interested in developing shale, of which Algeria has very large reserves, I think the third or the fourth in the world. But unconventional gas, shale gas, poses a problem, because it was attempted some trial runs in 2013, I think, and there were riots in the oasis towns. Why? Because people do not trust the government or the oil company, Sonatrach, to use the water and to avoid contamination. Now, there's a lot of water under the Sahara, but obviously, if that gets contaminated, that's you're on a hiding to nothing.
That causes problems. Yeah. All right. So privatization, liberalization is one thing. What else would you recommend to the government, Francis?
Well, I think Algeria has a big problem with its, how can I say, with the use of soft power. It doesn't know how to use soft power. The Moroccans, in this respect, have done a wonderful job, and they've probably oversold the qualities of their country, but they've done it very well for the last 30, 40 years. The Algerians will not grant visas to journalists. They are very sparse. They will not grant visas to most journalists. They will not organize cultural events in Algeria or outside Algeria. They will not promote their country. So as a result, and it's very visible, you mentioned this seminar in London run at LSE 2 weeks ago, but it's visible in so many places. People simply do not know Algeria. Hence, you get commentators on French television, respected commentators, saying Russia is an ally of Algeria. Well, there's never been a treaty of alliance militarily between Russia and Algeria. But part of it may be prejudice, but part of it also comes from not wielding all the soft power you could. It's a complicated story, and one can say that the Algerian leaders are probably at times paranoid, but then I would say the same for some French leaders, particularly on the right, and for part of the chattering classes in this town in Paris. They are paranoid about Algeria. So, we end up with a rather messy and sad situation.
Yeah.
But Algeria has recovered from the civil war. It is recovering from the Bouteflika years, which did enormous damage to Algeria. And in this very turbulent world, it has good relations with the Trump administration. It has good relations with Spain, with Turkey, and in particular, it has excellent relations with Italy. Italy is investing in oil, gas, helium, green energy, food processing, agriculture. The Italians are the great ally of Algeria in Europe. And that's
a good ally to have. So I asked you for three. You've come up with two. One is liberalization and increasing privatization opportunities. The second is telling the story, the narrative that Algeria, needs to open up. What would your final recommendation be, Francis?
Well, then the final one would be to promote younger people in the senior ranks of power. I mean, that's a story you could say for many countries. But whatever the quality of the senior ministers or the chief of staff or so on, I mean, I take the Algerian army. I don't know the chief of staff, so it's not a personal comment. But the Algerian officers are exceedingly well trained. Over the course of, I'm 81, over the course of the last 30 years, I've come across endless numbers of officers at the captain, colonel level. They are all very well educated, very well drilled. There is a lot of talent there. And my suspicion is it just is being underused on a grand scale. And these people, when you argue them, they're fiercely nationalistic, but they're well informed, they're interesting, they've got a view of the world, and it's a view of the world which is shared in many of the countries of the South. So it is this, I mean, Algeria has been very good over 70 years at devouring its best children. Its best talent somehow it seems to misuse or not use or use too little and then just discard people. And that is where there is a major, major problem. Now, what it's due to is another question, but they certainly waste a lot of energy by not using their educated and talented men and women far better than they have done to date.
That's a good place to end on using youth of Algeria, get them more into the system. There are opportunities, as you've said, over many podcasts and in the articles you contribute, there are opportunities for Algeria. So let us hope that as opportunity knocks, that Algeria is able to grasp the nettle, to mix up my metaphors, and we shall wait and see what happens next. But in the meantime, I thank you so much for coming on to talk about Algeria.
Thank you very much for inviting me yet again, Bill. Thank you.
My guest today on the Arab Digest podcast was Francis Ghilès, a specialist on security, energy, and political trends in North Africa and the Western Mediterranean. Arab Digest is is an independent voice on the Middle East and North Africa. You'll have noticed we bring you the podcast with no sponsors and no advertising. It's the same for our daily newsletter. We are supported only by our subscribers. As I said, Arab Digest is an independent voice. If you'd like to support that voice, head to our website, arabdigest.org. There you'll find a team of experts, contributors like Francis, covering developments in the Middle East and North Africa in depth and with insights you will not find anywhere else. Follow us on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and search our library of more than 300 podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or other platforms. I'm William Law, editor of the Arab Digest. Essential reading, essential listening from independent sources.